Well, good afternoon, everybody. It is 2 o'clock. Welcome to the Standards Committee meeting of the 9th of September. This is a multi-location meeting, so we have people present. So thank you all for coming today, and also online. Do hope you can see and hear us. Please, can I ask that you have your mobile phones on silent or turned off? Reminds me, students today myself. Except that I've left it in the car, so I don't have to worry. First of all, I'd welcome to everybody. And do we have any chair's announcements, Craig? We don't have them talking. Okay, thank you very much. Second item on the agenda, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest?
Oh, I see no hands.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Our third item, minutes of the last meeting. May I have your approval? The minutes are a correct record. Yes.
That proposed, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And are there any items which
nothing
mentioning which are not on the agenda?
No, we'll pick any few matters up on the agenda, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Our fourth item is our forward work programme on pages 11 to 12.
Nothing further really to report, Chair. Obviously, as members will be aware, this was a reconvened meeting. We were due to hold this particular one in July, so I just brought forward the items ultimately from consideration in July into this meeting. Forward work programme for October 2025 will remain very much the same. I do need to add one or two additional reports on there with regards to some information that's been sent to us by the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales. We'll be getting those papers out to you in due course because I'm conscious there will be a lot of reading ultimately in this one, so we'll get them to you in advance given the volume of information as soon as possible.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Can I say thank you that these papers came out early as well? They were quite handy.
Yes, it is extremely helpful, isn't it, when papers come out with a good period for us to read them. There's nothing worse, is there, than getting them the day before. So yes, I reiterate your thanks. Thank you very much, Craig. So we have an interesting work programme ahead of us, don't we? I'm sure the next meeting will be very interesting indeed. Thank you. The next item is item number 5, the annual review of the Members' Code of Conduct, beginning on page 13.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is a document ultimately members will have seen in various different guises and iterations over the years. It's probably the most intrinsic document that we have ultimately as a standards committee to be able to look at the members' code of conduct, because it's that document that sets out the key responsibilities and obligations ultimately of elected members to make sure that they're behaving ethically and in line then with the various different norms and principles and all the other guidance ultimately we expect as members. As you've heard me mention on a regular basis, the moment a member takes office and signs that they were happy to become an elected member, the obligation is there in the first instance, then they will have to comply with the code of conduct ultimately from that point on. So the document itself is very much ultimately guided on some legislation ultimately that's been created, and it's a model code of conduct that applies ultimately to all local authorities ultimately in Wales. So the ability ultimately for us to make substantive changes to it are perhaps very limited, but what we can do is we can tweak it on the edges a little bit to try and make sure that we are enshrining the recommendations that we as Neath Talbot ultimately want to take forward. So I've undertaken a review of the Code of Conduct document, and I felt that perhaps when I was looking at it, there were two slight tweaks that could be needed. One was to place it in a slightly better structure with some specific paragraph numbers and lettering, so we can always pinpoint specific terms of reference ultimately to be there instead of it just having flowing in general wording. But I also realised perhaps there was very little sort of relevance ultimately and referrals to the actual norms and principles themselves. So we talk about how the code of conduct ultimately is supposed to set out how a member should be complying with the norms and principles, but we don't actually say what they are within that document. So one of the suggestions I was going to put to the Standards Committee today is that we do make a tweak ultimately to our code of conduct, where we introduce the basic principles that should be guided in a member's forefront as and when they are then taking part in any activities or where they are acting as a councillor. So you'll see that I've added just a page at the front which says these are the principles that members must follow, with a narrative then as to what each element ultimately will be. But what it will also do then is give us some more generic elements we'll be able to focus on as part of discussions, because sometimes we can look at specific provisions such as we have, for example, whenever you conduct you carry out your duties with regards to the principles there should be equality of opportunity for all people, regardless of gender, race, disability, sexual orientation, age, or religion. So a very specific obligation, but you could actually extend that further about equality and respect and some of those other basic principles that ultimately come into it. So tying all of our sort of code of conduct back into those normal principles just seems to be a way of just making it clear ultimately to members those key principles that we are expecting them to follow. So I guess the reality of what we're looking at here now is just agreeing this revised version here. And if Standards Committee are happy, I'll take a report to full council and just ask full council to note it, that we are now going to be enshrining these principles in our code of conduct as well. So happy to answer any questions the members may have.
Thank you, Craig. Any questions or observations?
Yeah, just an observation, Chair. I think it's a good idea to put them in there. I think when it's there and people can see them, they're more likely to get used to them as well.
Yes,
So,
yes.
yeah.
No, I agree. And I think you've put it into context as well. So members, if reading that and keeping that handy, will just say put it into context and illustrate how it's applied in practice as well. So yes, it's good. Councillor Rogers, Bill, would you like
Thanks,
to come
Chair.
in?
Yeah. I just wanted to say I think it makes pure sense. I think the principles are quite easy to follow, aren't they? And I think integrating them in makes perfect sense to me. I think it's a good move. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So are we all agreed to those suggested changes, which I think will definitely enhance the code? Yes, please. Thank you very much indeed.
Great.
The next item is item number 6, which is attendance at the town and community council meeting.
Indeed. So again, this is a follow-up to some reports you received previously from me, and we actively have encouraged over the last couple of years some observation of some of our town and community council meetings themselves, because one of the actual responsibilities ultimately of the Standards Committee is to look at the issues of conduct and behaviour where we do have referrals made to us by the Public Service Ombudsman. And in our previous annual reports, we said we would look ultimately to include that as a requirement on us going forward. So what I've included within your papers today are a list of dates of both town and community council meetings, but also dates of Neath Talbot council meetings as well, because our Standards Committee, you are welcome to attend any meetings of the council to be able to see how the code of conduct and other obligations then are being applied in all of our meetings. So I wanted to make sure you had the full options for dates ultimately associated with you. So what I've suggested previously is if there are particular sessions or dates the members would wish to attend to, they can let me know and I'll link in with the clerk then ultimately to notify that you would be in attendance. And in most cases, you can attend either virtually or in person, whatever works ultimately for yourselves. And what I've also looked to do then as well is to look at our feedback form that we were utilising previously. And I found perhaps that we were getting some information which was very difficult ultimately to be able to gather in that sense, where we were asking you to look at, could you see what was going on in the meeting? Did you have names ultimately there? But there's the key focus ultimately from us from the Standards Committee is to look at the conduct implications ultimately that go with it. So rather than conflate various different issues, I thought what we could do is just have some more general observations ultimately being included. So you'll see I'm asking you to look at were declarations of interest made, how and when do they crop up during the meeting? Did you notice how the people were complying with some of those known principles of selflessness, honesty, integrity, and to give you the opportunity to put some more general thoughts and observations down without you being very limited to specific questions, which we had previously. And also as well, give you the opportunity for some recommendations or suggestions, which I felt could be useful. So if you see something that comes out of the meeting, you think, well, actually, they could benefit from doing it in a slightly different way, or there were some thoughts ultimately there. Something else we can have some discussion on then at the actual Standards Committee, and we go back then to the Town and Community Council clerks as well, and hopefully they will get some benefit out of it, of hearing views from somebody who's not associated with that council, and hopefully it comes from an objective outsider's perspective. So form itself will be included, and I'll issue all with a Word version, so you can tap about as you go, or a printed version, whichever you ultimately would be more comfortable with. And so if you're happy, Chair, it's just to note those dates and to agree then the revised form that we'll use going forward.
So how many members do we have? How many are we looking to attend every community council? Or?
We don't have to at all.
Yeah,
I wanted to put all of the dates ultimately down, and you can make a decision what ultimately works for you. So if you can attend one, you can attend 2 or 3. It's whatever.
But you can deconflict them, for instance, to yeah.
Absolutely fine indeed. I just wanted to give you as much flexibility as possible. There's no compulsion to attend any of those meetings, but if you would like to, these are the dates ultimately that they're being held. And when you have your feedback, send that back to me, and we'll reconvene then, and we'll bring it into this meeting, as we've done in some previous examples in the past.
Yes. And I think, given we are a small committee, but nevertheless, the numbers on, we can get a good cross section of council. So, if we go to different ones, then we are going to get that a broader picture, aren't we? So, yes. Thank you very much. I thought the form was much improved. Thank you, Craig.
Hopefully it's just something to give more generic viewpoints, and hopefully as well from a town and community council perspective, they can get some benefit from it as well, with some recommendations coming forward as part of that at the same time.
Yes. Yeah, and also not forgetting the council meetings, different for councillors because you are going to those meetings anyway, but for the independent members, again, I think it's helpful for us to go because it puts our discussions with the group leaders and the backbenchers into context then, and we can pick up things and it'll help to inform discussions.
Indeed, what I would recommend potentially if you are looking to attend a council meeting, probably full council is probably the most interesting one ultimately to come to. A scrutiny meeting, a planning committee meeting, they're the ones that tend to attract the most discussion and sometimes the most debate. So, but the option is there to attend any meeting that you wish.
Yes, scrutiny, I agree, would be good because of the element of challenge there and questioning, and the purpose of the scrutiny committee is one that would bring up certain things, wouldn't it? In the discussion. So that would be interesting. Yes, I agree. And planning is always one where it's quite a minefield, isn't it, in terms of following the rules and regulations, and people can get caught out. So we're not there to catch people out, but we're there to observe how things are conducted and how members participate. So yes, very much. So are we happy to note the changes? Thank you very much. Next item is item number 7. Code of Conduct and Confidential Reporting Procedure.
Indeed. So this is something, Chair, that actually came out of my view of the Code of Conduct document earlier on, and some of the reflections that we needed to change there. So there was a provision in that document, paragraph 2.6b, that says you should report whether through your authority's confidential reporting procedure, any conduct by any other member who we've been involved in is likely to involve criminal behaviour as part of that arrangement. And I was searching back then through various documents, and I thought, well, where is our confidential reporting procedure? And I realised we didn't actually have one at that point. So I think it was important for me then that we do correct that, and we do put an actual reporting procedure then ultimately in place that I can issue to all elected members. So what you will see ultimately then now within the document is a template confidential reporting procedure for members. So what the scope is ultimately designed to achieve is that it's basically there to ensure that if a member wishes to report something, they have the opportunity to be able to do so in confidence and will not generally be made public, unless obviously we are required to by law in circumstances where it is necessary. So if they identify something which they think does need to be considered, they'll have the opportunity to speak to myself as the council's monitoring officer, and I can look then to see which would be the best way ultimately to take it forward at the same time. And that could be whether I need to speak to those members involved, whether I need to refer the same to the Public Service Ombudsman, whether there's an issue ultimately which could involve the police or another regulatory body at the same time. But it could be the case sometimes, well, there's no issues ultimately associated with it, and I can have that discussion back with the elected member who makes the referral. But I just felt it was important, given that we've got that specific obligation in the Code of Conduct, we do have a procedure or protocol that sits behind it that says if a member wishes to have those discussions, there's a way in which they'll be able to do that with me, and I can look then to see how I can try and address it going forward. And it doesn't place that member in any difficult position because there is a confidential system ultimately in place. So it's one of those exercises just to make sure that we are fully compliant with our Code of Conduct, but hopefully something that will be, one hopes you never have to use it, but if we did have to use it, we've got a system in place that ultimately for those arrangements.
Thank you, Craig. Sarah.
So I'm conscious when we have code of conduct complaints, members normally find out who's made the complaint against them. How's that going to work?
So if, for example, a formal complaint is made to the Public Service Ombudsman, then yes, that member will be told ultimately where that complaint has ultimately come from. What this is designed to achieve is that if members feel that there is something I need to be aware of ultimately, or they've seen something, they have the ability to have a confidential discussion with me. So it's not a formal complaint that's ultimately being made. It's just more of a reporting tool which will flag up a concern that
So
will be
awareness.
able to take place. It's a more awareness basis, absolutely.
Should we be adopting this at community and town councils?
It's an option for you, yes, because I would have thought in your code of conduct, you would have the same replication of what 2.6a would have said. So again, it's available ultimately for anyone to adopt. They needed to specific.
That would be helpful, wouldn't it, for town and community councils as well? Yes. Yeah.
Door hat. So.
Yes.
I like copy and paste this.
Yeah, I understand. I think it feels like a safe procedure as well for people that they're more likely to use in the first instance.
Yes. Yeah. And also it is helpful, isn't it? We've got the policy, but without the procedure, there's an element there of uncertainty, or how do I go about this? So this really helps to support that in a very positive way. So thank you, Craig. Any no comments? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Phil.
Well, I was going to say as well. So, what if you felt, having had this confidential report, that you did then need to move it into a complaint? Would that confidentiality be maintained?
I would be speaking to that elected member ultimately who made that referral to me, and I would explain the difficulty ultimately that we had. Because of course, if a complaint is need to be brought against that member, it will be the ombudsman who will be taking that forward, and we would look to try and progress it then in a slightly similar way. But if a member comes to speak to me on a confidential information, before any confidence would be breached, I would be speaking to that elected member to explain to them why I was in that predicament and what the purposes ultimately were behind it. So that member is quite clear what those issues and everything like that will be. Because of course, if it does get into an ombudsman territory, then the name will always be identified potentially at that point. But if a member comes to see me, I'll be explaining all of these circumstances at the time, so they know when they are speaking to me what the consequences ultimately could be at the same time.
Of course, it's worth noting that it's breach of the code. We don't report something we know about, so it it kind of puts us in a position where we have to proceed at that point, doesn't it?
Very much so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Good. So we all approve that to go to full council. Yes. Thank you very much. Our next item is number 8. The survey results, the elected member survey results and the action plan.
Yeah, so again, this is something that came from one of our previous meetings, Chair. We agreed that we would undertake a survey with elected members to look at potentially unacceptable behaviours, because we've been doing a programme of work within our Democratic Services Committee regarding what I've called member harassment, alarm and intimidation. So we've seen, for example, members have been highlighting that there is a greater sometimes level of concern ultimately from the community in that sense in respect of various different matters, where members may have been harassed on social media or intimidated, for example, for not pursuing a course of action, and the level of social media abuse maybe has increased in various different ways. And you recall, we as a standards committee developed a social media toolkit ultimately to try and address that. So given ultimately where we were at the moment and the work of the Democratic Services Committee, we thought ultimately we would have a look at it from a standards perspective and look to see how we can address some of the conduct implications and some of those other factors ultimately into our discussions going forward, and what we can do there to work in dovetail ultimately with the work of the Democratic Services Committee. So we agreed at the meeting a survey of questions that we would undertake, and we issued that electronically to members. So it ran for the period of roughly 6 weeks. Sadly, at the time, we only had 12 members responding up to the 59, which was a shame we didn't get a much more wider pool of information ultimately for it. But it's given a little bit of food for thought ultimately in respect to the various ways in which we look at things. So some interesting elements, I think, came out of it when you look at it. So if you take the issue of bullying then in that aspect, so we said out of 12 members who responded to the survey, 5 reported that they experienced bullying during their current term, and most of that related to online abuse, in the sense of the occasional verbal bullying ultimately. Not necessarily from other councillors. At that point, that was from members of the public, for example, who had approached them in some sort of constituency-related work. And sadly, because they were not able to help them, the matter had turned somewhat aggressive as a result of it. Most occurred either online within the local community, which I suppose again highlights the digital and public-facing nature of the challenge the members face. There were some instances where people had reported harassment, predominantly again verbal harassment, and I think a lot of it stemming on the social media in that sense. And I think it was interesting that it was highlighted for most of those affected, these incidents occurred on more than 2 occasions. So it was repeated behaviour in those circumstances, not an isolating event in different way. We had one member who commented that they reported experiencing discrimination during their term, and that was from their perspective around inclusivity and respect for gender as a result of it. The incident occurred again in an online setting. Fortunately, from what we've seen, I think that is probably the greatest message that ultimately comes out of this work is abuse, intimidation, harassment has moved from the traditional sense probably of what we would have seen on a face-to-face and a community basis, and a significant proportion of it now ultimately is online. 6 respondents indicated they shared their experiences of unacceptable behaviour informally, but only 1 person proceeded to make a formal report, and I believe that was to the police at that point. I think it was interesting that in some cases there were some barriers to formal reporting. They felt a lack of confidence in the reporting process to the Ombudsman, for example, where they had reported it and then it was automatically dismissed by the Ombudsman on the basis of their public interest test element. So that meant the general reluctance to sometimes escalate matters through official channels, which I think was a disappointing element here, that people who have been a victim of those particular abuses feel that sometimes the system is not ultimately driving the need ultimately to try and take it forward. Lots of instances where people feel they've been targeted by members of the public, and also suggested that they'd witnessed behaviours of council officers being targeted at the same time ultimately. And that's something I've certainly seen online lately, whereas historically you could have argued, for example, it was the members who would have feared the wrath ultimately from individuals. There's sometimes a target against officers of the council where they are being named in respect of various matters and some of the changes ultimately around there. But again, when they've witnessed those, sometimes they've not necessarily been reporting them at the same time. So what I tried to look then is at the information that we received, well, what could we ultimately do to try and look at some sort of improvement options going forward? So created a bit of a sort of provisional action plan that will help try and address these matters. So I think that the first element is always an important one, training and awareness, to look at some training for additional members in respect of recognising bullying, harassment and discrimination. There are some members who may not have been totally accustomed to it, so it's an opportunity for them to see what could constitute those levels of behaviours, but also as well looking at how they can try and support and address matters and call such behaviour out in an important manner at the same time. So we're going to look to build in a certain work programme to be able to address that. We're going to look to see if we can bring it under the line of what we're calling conflict resolution at the same time as well, something that we picked up on previously, where all members will be invited to a workshop in respect of conflict resolution, and some of our officers and democratic services have been on a recent course ultimately on it to test it to see how it worked, and it worked out quite well. So we're looking to see how we can adapt it for our elected members at present. Making sure that we have clear behavioural standards. So obviously one of the work programmes of the Democratic Services Committee has been to create a member intimidation, harassment and alarm protocol, and we've been supported very ably by Talbot Police. They provided us a lot of information and they provided a lot of additional training elements for us at the same time. So we're looking to see how we can develop that in a different way. Creating a confidential reporting mechanism, so people, if they do have concerns, they have an opportunity to be able to flag it with me. One of the things ultimately that we are going to be doing as well is creating a centralised system so we can start logging all of these elements that come forward. So even if it's the case that people feel that they're not in a position where they want to refer that to the police, the ombudsman or any other regulator associated with it, we'll be able to keep an accurate record where somebody can just go online, fill in a quick form to say I was suffered this level of harassment or abuse. I will get a record of it at the same time, and we've got an opportunity then to be able to track things to see how things are developing, and it will be very self-reporting. So it's not something you're going to have to come to speak to me about. You'll be able to tap it and then it'll all be there in that sense. And obviously then we can follow up some of that work to look for repeating patterns about how we can work forward then within our standards regime and within our democratic services element as well.
How much detail is going to be put on that?
Very good. We're not going to put a huge level of detail. We're going to look at what the incident was,
Yeah.
and details ultimately the
Good.
members wish
You know,
to
when
report.
Talbot police get a single online reporting thing, there's chapter and verse goes on there.
Yeah.
And something that's put on through that portal can't be dealt with by traditional policing means. So it's a case of, well, who's going to make that decision and go back to the referrer and say, perhaps you need to report this in a different way.
Yeah, and I think that would probably is going to end up being my responsibility in that
Right.
sense. So when there's the case ultimately that somebody does log something on that line,
Yeah.
you will ping an email to me. I'll have an opportunity to have a look at it, and I can reach out to the member then to look at, well, we need to look at this in a certain way. Ultimately, it's about me getting some relevant facts ultimately, so I can make sure I can support members in the best forum ultimately to do that. We're also as well going to be providing members over the course of the next couple of weeks and months a set of risk assessments and some guidance ultimately. So when they are undertaking their constituency work, which could be surgery work, they'll have some practical guidance as to how they can keep themselves safe in those scenarios as well. So we have had some additional health and safety training. Our health and safety officers are going to be enhancing that to be able to take into account some of the recent obligations and some of the other challenges ultimately that are coming with it as well. So high overview there as to the bits we've taken forward. What I would like to try and do is maybe next year we will repeat this survey in the hope to see what changes maybe come about with members. Hopefully we can drive up some more responses as well, and we can keep this flowing and look to see how we can just develop this going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Craig.
So
Perhaps get the different leaders to generate it.
Exactly, something we can raise with our group leaders as well ultimately in the group leaders meeting in the course of the next couple of weeks.
as a member, we had some training a little while ago about it was because the threat level rose. And a lot of that advice was a bit difficult for members to follow. It was things like, you know, if you're going to an event or you're holding a surgery, don't tell people that you're going to be there. And I mean,
It's the object.
yeah, it's not really a surgery if no one knows it's happening, is it, or where it is, or that you're going to be there. So I'm hoping that we'll get something a bit more practical for members out of this, as opposed to that.
That's
Somewhat unhelpful
why
advice.
we are looking for something slightly different at the moment. So the conflict resolution training ultimately that you have, we're going to be offering you soon, is designed to be more workshop based, practical based, scenario based. We'll do it with a smaller group of members instead of it being an all member seminar. And we're thinking in then with our new health and safety officers to look to see how we can look to make this more pragmatic and more practical ultimately for members so they get something out of it at the same time. And it's not just you will do this, you should do this in that sense.
Don't do this.
Yeah.
It's often I often get conflicting advice. I know if someone's come in, it's probably going to say the same thing. But I get quite a lot of pressure from colleagues and party and so on to be quite present online, whereas I get quite a lot of advice from Craig saying like, don't use online.
Yes,
Anyway,
balance,
thank you.
yes, yeah. Phil, would you like to come in,
Thank
Phil?
you. Thank you. Yeah, yes. What's great to hear that Craig has volunteered himself to look at all the reported incidents, because obviously he's got so much time in his hands that nice to see him volunteering. I thought it was a bit disappointing that only 12 members actually responded, which obviously we're all moaning about different types of abuse we're having, and yet only 12 filled it in. So I think the onus will be on to try and sort of strong arm a lot more members to fill in the survey next time. And I got to say, this reporting of what I call low level incidents, really, I'll give an example. Week before last, lady got in touch with me to sort something out. I found out about it, came back, it wasn't the answer she wanted, and she swore at me on the phone. So I said, thank you very much. Now you've sworn at me, that's the end of our conversation. Thank you. And I put the phone down. The following morning, she said, are you okay to talk now? And I said, yeah, okay. As long as you don't swear at me, I'll carry on talking to you. But she got the same answer anyway. But something like low level like that, just to keep track of it. And perhaps if we all start reporting things, we'll have a little bit more advice on what the best way to handle different situations are. Because obviously Craig can't come up with an answer for everything that's going to happen. It's it's a never-ending thing, this. But if an incident comes up, perhaps it doesn't have to name who the person is, but we can mention to other members, look, this has happened to one of your members. This is what I recommend you should do. So I'm really, really keen on the reporting of the lower level incidents. I think if you've got anything that is really real, major abuse, then I think it's a police issue as far as I'm concerned. You've got to protect yourself. But that's my view anyway. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Phil. Thank you.
And I think I have to thank the support we've had from South Wales Police. So through the Democratic Services Committee, we've been writing to them and liaising with them on various different matters, and they've been very supportive and presenting various different guidance for us to consider. And I think they're going to come in to talk to some members in due course as well as part of that. So my thanks go to the wider network of people who've been supporting us on this.
I thought this was a very important piece of work. What's come out of it, Craig, is a lot of things there to help and support members. But it's also highlighted that actually the level of abuse that members are experiencing from their constituents and online is not acceptable, but it's the extent of it as well. It is disappointing we only had 12, but of those 12, they're all reporting very similar things. So therefore, that could well be replicated right across. And the reporting of the low-level incidents, again, is crucial. That they might be low-level. It's a bit like, how much do you take? But it all builds up to make a picture. I always remember when the police started recording racial incidents, and the extent of it was unknown at that time, but the more it was reported, the better picture they got, and that would give you that information to be able to deal with the issues and inform any training, advice, or whatever it may be. So I thought it was, as I say, hugely a positive thing to do, and some very constructive things are coming out of that. So thank you, Craig.
I'm going to be honest, I didn't know the member survey was optional. I think I sat and went through it with you. Was this separate? A different one. All right. Yeah. Are we going to look at those results then?
They are considered Democratic Services Committee.
It is.
So I think they have been considered there already. There's been some feedback that came out of it. So
I think some of that could be useful to us as well. I remember some of the questions.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and Tom, I think you mentioned about the group leaders encouraging members next time it comes out to put it in, and I think that's really important, because unless, and for some people they may not be experiencing anything, but it's still important for them to contribute, so we get the full picture and it's not weighted too much either way.
Even if it's a negative reply, it's a reply that can
that's right.
has to be the stats.
So I think, Craig, if we can note of that for when we have our group leaders, and indeed the backbenchers as well, because the more members themselves encourage others to do it, the better, really, isn't it? So thank you.
It could have been that members that didn't experience anything thought, "Oh, this isn't for me," and then didn't. So I mean, it could actually be
it could be a positive thing. Yes, it could be.
Well, it could mean that our results look like it's very high levels, whereas in fact, all the people that didn't answer it didn't have anything to say on it. So
but it's good if they
it's good to count negative replies.
Indeed, yes.
Phil?
Sorry to come back in. Say it on that. I think the number of low-level incidents is quite high. Having chatted to a lot of my ex-colleagues, it's difficult to say now because I'm no longer part of the administration, but a lot of them are moaning about what I refer to as low level that you wouldn't normally report. Someone swears at you on the phone, or as a go on the street or in the pub or something like that. It's something that is going on all the time, I think, with a lot of members. And for them to say that it's not happening to them, I don't think there's many members that don't have one or two issues as they go through the year. And I think it's happening. Yeah. I think it's a general fact of society at the moment, whether it's be face to face or more often than not, it's online. You put something up that's hopefully something nice about what the council are doing that we're all proud of. And then next thing you get people having to go, and then they start to get a little bit of abusive with it. It's there we are. I think it's happening. It's quite widespread, I think.
Thanks very much, Phil.
I don't disagree with Phil at all, but I think it's really subjective on whether members consider that to be harassment or bullying. Or I don't know that I would have been like, oh yes, I'm getting bullied because somebody was mean to me on that. I'd be like, well, that comes to the job sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I suppose an issue about the low level stuff is that people become desensitized to it, and they let it wash over their heads because they feel, oh, it's not worth challenging this. But in fact, if you think about it, it is about lack of respect, isn't it? And for whether it's the person or whether it's the institution or whatever, it's about people thinking they can say and do what they like. So, okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that, Craig. I think that was really, really helpful. So we note the content of the report, and if there's anything else that members might wish to highlight, then we can always let you know. Can't
Please do, absolutely.
We'll look to repeat it again.
We will. So I'll bring a refreshed question in. I'll probably
Yes.
through to members. Probably now in the spring next year, and that sense. So we'll run it roughly at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Item 9 is members' indemnity.
Indeed. So again, this is a tidy up of a few loose ends in that sense document. So we have a provision ultimately that was within our constitution that where an elected member of Neath Talbot Council is subject to a complaint that's been made to the Public Service Ombudsman, which is then referred to collectively as the Standards Committee to consider, that they are entitled to claim an indemnity in respect of any legal costs ultimately that they wish to have in defending the matter of the Standards Committee up to a ceiling of £20,000. So basically, what that would mean is that if they have legal advice, then they can bill the council ultimately for that up to a figure of £20,000 in defending that allegation. However, if it's found then that they have failed to comply with their code of conduct, then that money has to be reimbursed ultimately to the council. Or if they admit anything during the course of the proceedings, again, that sum ultimately needs to be reimbursed. So the purpose then of the indemnity is to set up the policy ultimately as to what we will follow for that, and also as well then to make sure that we have a document that the member will actually sign themselves to confirm that they are signing up to those arrangements, which obviously then we can enforce against them if it's the case that we do need to reclaim any of the money that goes with it. I have to apologise to Councillor Dean Lewis. For some reason, I have Dean Lewis's name in the member indemnity agreement ultimately there. I can confirm he has never received an indemnity ultimately from us. So I do apologise that his name has been entered in there. That's a pure administrative typo on my part. So yes, that's just an example then of what the actual term of the agreement ultimately would be, where that will be tied in there to make sure that they do repay it. So again, just asking for Standards Committee today to endorse that so we have it documented as and when that we do need it. And in all my recent times, I've never had a member ultimately claim that indemnity when we have had a county borough councillor obviously come before you, but we can offer it at the same time, and then we have a protocol in place ultimately to deal with it as and when it comes.
Okay, thank you, Craig.
Thank you. So I think I can understand why there's never been a claim on it, because I mean, obviously, if you had legal advice, you'd have to pay for it upfront, and then you know, if it comes about, and if it goes to standards, there's a good chance there is something. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been referred standards, it wouldn't have passed the test and so on at that level. So they're almost always going to pay it back. It seems a little sort of.
I mean, I take the point of what you're saying, but I suppose the reality is the person is entitled to a fair hearing ultimately when they come before you as a standards committee. You are entitled ultimately to find at that point that there has been no breach of the code of conduct. Yes, there may be an investigation report that has come to you from the ombudsman, but you were the arbitrators to decide ultimately whether that breach has taken place, and if so, whether a sanction should ultimately be invoked. So that person has a clean bill of health ultimately until before they appear you. The concept of innocent until proven guilty is the way we have a look at it. So what this is designed to achieve is that if a member who does have to appear before the Standards Committee and they're not placed at any prejudice or they're not placed at any detriment of the mere fact that they don't have that advice ultimately to provide them, so they can mount the best defence ultimately that they can, and then you as a Standards Committee can make the determination whether there has been a breach of the code of conduct or not.
Following on from that then, what I appreciate it says that we will take action if they need to pay back, and they don't pay back within a certain amount of time, but I assume that would be debt collection. But does that lead to then issues with you not, because you owe the council money, much like if you've got arrears on council tax?
Yes, absolutely. There are issues associated with that. So we would have to obtain court orders potentially to reclaim, but hopefully we'll never get into that territory. But we would try ultimately to arrange a repayment scheme in that
there is
sense.
a bit of flexibility. It doesn't have to pay back fully.
If a member claimed the full £20,000, I wouldn't say you now pay the full £20,000
Right,
back.
okay.
I would be saying you could pay £1,000 a month, or you could pay
I've got to be honest,
months
like,
in that
if it
sense.
was that situation, I'd just be like, no, sorry, I'll manage without it.
Yeah.
You know.
So, but it's an offer that is on the table ultimately then for that. Thank you.
Louise, it's me, it's Phil, it is. Yep. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, you got a bit quiet there. Yeah, I quite
Yeah.
like this. It's nice to know there is a safety net. In answer to Sarah's probably thing that if it gets to standards, then it's probably somewhere. You could answer that with any legal case that's taken to court, really, couldn't you? That police would the Crown Prosecution Service press with any trial if they didn't think there was some chance that it would be found guilty. But then again, not all cases are found guilty. So and that's really obviously upsetting Tom here because everyone's guilty, Tom, and they're guilty, and yeah, I'm only joking, Tom. I'm joking, I am. But just to say that, I think it's a nice safety net. Safety net. Sorry, it's easy for me to say it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. And and again, it's useful for us to be aware of this, and it all forms part of the suite of policies,
It
practices,
shows that
and
we're considering
procedures.
people's human rights.
Yes,
at the end
yes,
of
it
the day.
is. Yes, and whether or not people take it out is irrelevant in a way. It is there if somebody might need it, and I think that's the important thing. Thank you very much. So we endorse it. Yes, approve. Yes. All agrees. Right. Thank you. And then our next item is the whistleblowing policy.
So again, this is one of these reports we bring to you on an annual basis. It's just a copy of the council's whistleblowing policy, and it's there hopefully just for you to review. And if there's any comments you wish to make or any recommendations you wish to suggest, we can take them through then to the appropriate group to take it forward. So just to give you a little bit of background here, council has adopted a whistleblowing policy in line with the requirements of the Public Interest Disclosure Act. So whistleblowing in its true sense, it means the reporting by employees of suspected misconduct, illegal acts or failure to act within the council. The aim of the policy is to encourage employees and others who have serious concerns about any aspect of the council's work to come forward and voice those concerns. Well, I'll add in the first instance, it doesn't apply to elected members. If they have a concern, ultimately it's for officers or others. Hence the reason we go back to the confidential reporting document we were talking about earlier on to make sure that it can dovetail in then as part of these arrangements. So policy provides protection for workers who report allegations of such malpractice or misconduct, tying in then obviously with the legal obligations under the Public Interest Disclosure Act, and it's designed to ensure that all allegations of malpractice and misconduct are thoroughly investigated and suitable action taken where necessary. So it's intended to encourage and enable workers to raise serious concerns rather than overlooking a problem or blowing the whistle ultimately outside. So it's led in part by both the people and organisation development section and our audit section, and then I input ultimately from a monitoring officer perspective. But obviously the review of this is something that also sits within the standards committee element. So it's just brought before you today, hopefully for your review, endorsement, or any particular queries or suggestions you wish to make on it.
Thank you very much, Craig. Any observations or comments?
So it feels like we've done this one quite recently.
Yeah, we did. Yes, nice to see it come back with the amendments made. So yes. Okay. Are we all content with the report and the changes that have been made? Thank you very much. And then we come on to item number 11, the decisions of the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales.
Yeah, I was finding these very interesting reports ultimately when they come forward. So it's just the types of matters that have been considered at the Ombudsman level in recent times. I'm always quite relieved when I don't see Neath Talbot Council or one of our town and community councils named there on these occasions. But it's just the matters that have been considered over the last couple of months. And as you see when you go through them, in all cases, whilst the Ombudsman considered them, they didn't actually look to take any further action, and it wasn't actually referred then back to the Standards Committee, which is interesting in them all, right? Because you do read some of them, you think, oh, okay, I can understand why hasn't that ultimately been triggered back, or whatever the case may be. But again, wide variety of types of matters ultimately that they are considering. The ones I always find very interesting are disclosure and registration of interest, about making sure that those interest elements are ultimately being considered as part of decision making. And it's good to see the emphasis on making sure that they are heavily challenged and heavily considered ultimately by the Ombudsman when those issues, and also some of the general matters about integrity in that sense. And I think it's also very interesting is the language that they use and how they classify them now ties back into the Nolan principles, going back to where we were at the start talking about the code of conduct. in that they're referencing normal principles a little bit more with it in the way they categorise issues. So it's ideal opportunity to have seen the refresher ultimately that we've made there. So some interesting ones ultimately in that. I wouldn't propose to go through each of them unless members have some specific questions, but hopefully the note just give the overviews of the types of matters they've been considering in recent times.
Thank you, Craig. Yes, they are always interesting to read. Yes, Sarah.
So I think this links back into what we were talking about with the members not reporting things, in that, you know, out of these 12, not a single one has progressed or anything. And I think a lot of people in public and perhaps councillors look at the ombudsman and think it's a little bit toothless at times, and that there's not a lot of point in reporting things because it quite frequently doesn't go anywhere. And I do appreciate that there's a two-step test and it has to meet, and like you were saying about CPS, I mean, you know, there's no point in proceeding if you haven't got the evidence and so on. But I do think sometimes it'd be helpful if they did sort of go a little bit further on some of these. Like I went through them all, and I was thinking some of the non-disclosures, I mean, prejudicial disclosures should be disclosed and you should leave the meeting. So I would have thought evidence would exist for that in the form of minutes, and I don't really know why that didn't proceed. So
I think from what I've picked up ultimately from my review of a lot of these cases is in the majority of them, the evidence was there ultimately to substantiate that there had been a code of conduct violation, but it was just the nature of it was such that the public interest test wasn't necessarily engaged. And the ombudsman has only sort of finite resources ultimately in which they can take forward. So they've got to prioritise some of their other cases ultimately that come in which had more significant impact on a wider pool of people or a wider community, or there could be some allegations where that council was benefited ultimately in some way, which they then need to be seen to be taking some action on. So it's how they balance all of those ultimately together. But yeah, it's just fascinating. In each of these scenarios, it's probably the public interest test they would have failed on because there was some evidence there to consider that there'd been a breach of the code itself.
And then hopefully as well, measures would be taken within the councils, respective councils, to actually, you know, speak to the member, have further training, point out that actually this is against the code, etc., etc. So I think if it happened here in this council, that's the kind of thing that would happen.
Very much so. So, for example, if a complaint is made against an elected member to the ombudsman, they will write to that member and tell them a complaint has been made and give them the opportunity to put their own side of the story across. They will then make a determination whether it's something ultimately they're going to take forward. If they don't take it forward, they will write back to that elected member. And I actually get a copy of that letter as well, saying why they're not taking it forward. And then I look to see, is it something that I need to address then on a local level with that member to make sure that we're not placed in that position ultimately again. So it's a follow-up for myself. Sometimes it can be a bigger picture that I need to address ultimately. So when I'm doing my next code of conduct training for members, I may need to adapt to tie in some specific examples that has come out of it. So that's the benefit of, I guess, me seeing everything that comes back in from the ombudsman. It gives me an opportunity to identify if there is a bigger picture issue from a Neath Talbot Council perspective that we need to address. And I'm pretty sure in some cases, clerks will get a copy of that notification ultimately as well. So they've got an opportunity to look at it from their own town and community council's perspective as well. If there's an issue that they need to take forward, and I can gladly support clerks in any way that they need to on that front.
I will say, I think there might be some missing from here.
Bill.
Hello. I'm just thinking on this issue. I say I agree with Sarah. It's quite big when they come up with this. There's no cases that are going forward, but I think it's a question of whether it's the carrot or the stick, really. And looking at some of them, are we looking to punish members or to educate them? And I think from reading between a lot of it, the fact it's been reported means that they will have been spoken to, and hopefully they've been educated as to the future conduct. I think if they were to do it again, then I think they should be whipped with 1,000 tails, cat's tails. I think so. There we are. You know what I'm saying? I think education is better than punishment. I think. Thank you.
Yes, because the whole point is for them not to do it again. So,
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. So we note that report and its contents. Thank you. Item number 12 is the local resolution procedure.
Indeed. So this is again following up a report that we brought back, I think, earlier on this year, where we made a few tweaks ultimately to our local resolution process. If you recall, that is a document that effectively sets out a process where for low-level disputes ultimately between elected members, there's the opportunity for us to try and resolve that informally without it having to reach any ombudsman territory. So if you've got two elected members, maybe we've had a bit of a spat in a council meeting, or maybe something has happened online, it's a way ultimately where we can bring both of them together with a sort of informal mediator, which is usually one of our corporate directors, and look to see if there are ways ultimately we can try and address this, maybe through an apology or a statement online of some clarity being provided in various different matters. So there's been a lot of sort of debate ultimately in the wider local government network in Wales at the moment regarding local resolution procedures, whether they are binding, whether not binding, whether they are fit for purpose ultimately in respect of the content associated with it. So the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales, in conjunction with the Monitoring Officers Group that meets regionally, took some advice effectively on local resolution processes in general, and a copy of that ultimately we've included in your papers today. So we just wanted to make sure that it was sound and basically everything that was there. Some of the principles then that came out of it is that they are entirely informal. There's no statutory basis, so there's no requirement by law ultimately to have one, but it's just recommended good practice ultimately to consider, meant to be low level and trivial complaints. So that is everything at its lowest level. They're never going to be designed to achieve issues, for example, where there's been harassment or abuse, or there's been situations where interests have not been declared. It's just to deal with those minor trivial fractions ultimately between members. Important emphasising the need ultimately to make sure that it's clear, everyone knows what they're being considering and the specific example of it, and so there's clarity for all parties involved. Basic, and then on the basis that there's consent, ultimately a party is coming to be that you can't actually enforce anything against those members, but you are relying on the fact that when members do refer something to the local resolution process and agree, they do so in the spirit of trying to reach a degree of consensus appropriately. It's never going to oust the Ombudsman's powers, obviously, to investigate a potential breach, and any decision that is ultimately made informally can't really find itself in any sort of major significance or be relied upon under our process there. So I took a look then at our local resolution process ultimately to see whether we needed to make any changes in light of what this guidance would be. The good news is we didn't, because we'd already addressed lots of those different aspects ultimately as time has gone on. So I wanted to bring back now so you could see the full suite of information that's been provided and what some of the outcome of the reports nationally have been, and hopefully we can take assurance on the fact now that our LRP ultimately is suitable for its purpose and we have it documented. We'll continue to do ad hoc reviews ultimately in respect of where we are and to make sure that it remains fit for purpose. The key aspect for me is making sure that we are promoting it ultimately to members, and we've also as well been promoting it out to some town and community councils recently, because obviously I know some do have it, some don't. So recognising from what we've seen maybe in some internal issues that have been happening in some town and community councils, it may be a way for them to try and informally resolve some disputes at the same time.
Is it being used?
We have had 2 referrals to it in recent times. They sadly didn't reach a conclusion ultimately for those particular matters, where matters referred to the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman in that scenario found that there was no breach of the code of conduct ultimately in that regard. But we have had 2 small-scale referrals ultimately to it. And that they have been recently in the last couple of months. For years, we never had any, but we have had 2 recently.
So can town and community councils refer like local resolution things to Neath Talbot, or do they need their own policy?
They need their own policy ultimately associated with that.
So the only officer that's usually
Is the car.
yes.
Yes.
And sometimes the community councils can be a little close-knit, shall we say. So it can be difficult for the clerk to mediate and be fully neutral when we get it from both
True.
sides, if that makes sense.
Somebody from another council come in and act as that mediator?
Absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. Absolutely fine.
There
You
we
can
go.
ask anyone in matters. I mean, if you wanted to approach an officer of this council to try and assist,
Hey.
you can, but there might be some costs ultimately involved in that sense for it. I would never be able to, because I would be the advisor ultimately, and it never gets the standards committee perspective. But there's flexibility as to whom you could use. You could bring in somebody external, you could have an officer who's employed within your community council, it could be the clerk. as well. So there's various different programs you could use.
Okay, thank you.
Good community councils in having the panel, because so for Neath Talbot, it's a member of the Standards Committee. I've just seen it. Could community councils fall upon somebody else, another councillor from another community
Yes, they
council
got
to comprise
And
them?
that's absolutely fine. And
Yes.
if it was the case ultimately that they were still struggling with this and then they wanted to ask somebody from the Standards Committee even to be able to sit in and do so, I've got no objection, depending on if members ultimately were keen to do so. There's no compulsion, but it's an option as well,
Yeah.
potentially.
Because that would get over that issue where there is close relationships,
It's like
working
totally
relationships.
independent on both sides,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah. And that would be a very healthy thing to do, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Because it's not like the big
we
council.
have a lot more options available at state council
Yes,
as
yeah.
opposed to small councils.
Yeah.
My papa always calls it small council, but it is a Game of Thrones reference.
Thank you very much. So actually, it's been very helpful, I think, to see that, because we don't have a particularly high take up within the council to use this, do we? So, but it is good to see
It is.
it's actually set out.
I mean, you could look at it from the basis from a positive perspective, in that we've not had any instances where it have required ultimately
Yeah.
this to take place. And actually, we've had very limited ultimately referrals ultimately to the Ombudsman Office themselves, and you'll be getting at the next meeting a copy of the Ombudsman's annual report ultimately that says how many complaints he's had referred from Neath Talbot Council, and I believe it's only one in the last year, and it will give you some statistics compared to other authorities as well. So where we are at the moment is we are at the low level.
Yes.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
which is nice to see.
I think recall that one includes the town community council.
It does indeed. That's coming in.
But I think actually, I think it's good because we do have the group leaders coming to the Standards Committee where we are asking them, how they deal with these kind of matters within their group and the action that they're taking. So in some ways we can view it as a positive thing that actually, and isn't it always better that it comes from one's peers rather than something that's sort of imposed on someone?
I think it's good
So that-
feedback for them as well.
Yes.
Group leaders to show, just to mention it to them, saying, yeah, you are doing a good job actually by
Yeah.
reinforcing these.
Yeah. We do, of course, have a new group leader, who will be coming for the first time at some point.
Sure, coming in. I mean, it's October this time.
Right.
I'll look forward to meeting them. So we are content to note that report. Thank you. And then, Craig, do we have any urgent items?
We have no urgent items, chat.
Okay. That being the case, thank you all very much for your contributions, and I draw the meeting to a close.